Cardiovascular Medicine Grand Rounds. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome two long-term fixtures of the Yale New Haven Hospital community to speak at this week's Cardiovascular Medicine Grand Rounds to discuss our vaccine rollout. We are absolutely delighted and honored to have Dr. Tom Balcezak and Lorraine Lee present today. Ms. Lee earned her bachelor's degree at the University of Rhode Island in pharmacy and a master's degree in health administration at Simmons College. She subsequently joined after her training as a clinical pharmacist in the MICU and gradually acquired increasing administrative roles over time. And she currently serves as the Vice President of Corporate Pharmacy and Supply Chain Services, which has purview over the health system and not just the main campus. And Dr. Thomas Balcezak needs no introduction. He is the Chief Medical Officer of Yale New Haven Hospital. He received his medical degree from the University of Connecticut, a master's degree from Yale University, and he too has spent the entirety of his professional career at Yale, first as an intern and a resident, then a chief resident, and over time he also earned increasing administrative responsibility, and as I mentioned, is now the Chief Medical Officer of Yale New Haven Hospital. So thank you very much to the two of you for agreeing to join this morning and share out the intricacies of this very challenging yet so far seemingly very successful vaccination rollout. So thank you very much.
Good morning. Thanks for the invitation, and we appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully we'll give some useful information, answer some questions, and I already have received a couple of ideas for how we can improve things from some of the faculty, so that's all very much appreciated. So I'm going to give an introduction, but I want to make sure everyone understands that this has been an enormous team effort in our organization, really led by three individuals, Lori Lee, Om Deshpande, and Britta Roy from Department of Internal Medicine. And they've really been the guiding force in this and have assembled the team of teams that have conquered the logistics. I think we could all agree that delivering a vaccine, injecting a vaccine into someone's arm is relatively simple. The logistics behind all of that, whether it's the procurement, the coordination with the state, the cold storage, the scheduling, the scheduling and coordination of Moderna versus Pfizer, and then the standing up of these large vaccination sites has really been, I think, an enormous team effort. So if we could advance the slide ahead one, please. I think probably the best source of information is around the types of vaccines that are under development. Really over the last 9 months now has been the New York Times Vaccine Tracker website. I think they do an excellent job of showing where the world is for these 100+ vaccines that are under development. There's been a lot talked about the speed with which this vaccine development effort has happened. Our staff in particular have expressed some concerns, and a lot of the vaccine hesitancy that we're seeing is due to the fact that these vaccines have been developed rapidly. And we've spent a lot of time with our staff trying to explain that the mRNA technology, for example, has been around for more than a decade. This is the first vaccine used in humans, however, and it's, I think, causing some folks in our staff and I think across the country to have some hesitancy. And I think it's important for us to spend a lot more time talking about how the vaccines have been developed, how they've been tested, and what is some of the technology behind it. You can go to the next slide, please. So, of course, I think all of you on the Zoom call have been following this as we have been. I think the exciting part about some of the new technology, whether it be the mRNA or other genetic technologies or the adenovirus or other virus technologies, I think have really been astounding to watch for us. And I think it really shows how in this particular pandemic, we are really incredibly beneficial because of, we've been benefited, excuse me, because of the science and technology that has advanced. You know, the story behind the mRNA technology for vaccine, I think is a really great story. And if you haven't heard it, it's, you know, a lot of the technology was driven by a grad student who at Dartmouth, when he created this technology, was unable to get the paper published. And I think that's a pretty fun fact and kind of astounding. Can I have the next slide, please? So right now, across the United States, I think everyone knows that there is an emergency use authorization granted by Peter Marks, ironically, at the FDA for Pfizer and Moderna, both of which are quite similar in technology. In fact, Pfizer has licensed that particular mRNA segment from Moderna, and they differ in terms of their nanoparticle and some of the other technology, nanoparticle lipid layer and some of the other technology. But in essence, they're very, very similar. There has been some talk about mixing and matching doses. Last Monday, on the 4th of January, the FDA issued an advisory saying that they are not considering mixing and matching, nor are they considering single dose, nor are they considering a half dose of Moderna. So for the time being, we are still providing a full dose of Pfizer and Moderna at 21 and 28 days respectively. And we are using technology in part to ensure that people who are getting the Pfizer vaccine first, getting the Pfizer vaccine second, and so forth. Question about ethics. Last night, I was contacted by a local plaintiff's attorney asking why we are rolling out the vaccine the way we are rolling it out. There is a lot of scrutiny, as you probably saw over the weekend in the New York Times, about people jumping the line. And I think we have looked carefully at the way we are trying to do this. And frankly, I'm really disappointed. I think it's the wrong discussion and it's the wrong argument. I think we need to assume that people are doing the right thing. And I think we need to get as much vaccine into individuals as fast as we possibly can. And I think Connecticut, as you've all seen, has really led the country in doing so. One of the reasons why we are able to do that is because we have a really great pipe of communication between the DPH, the governor's office, and the hospitals across the state of Connecticut. And we actually have been fully transparent with the DPH and the governor's office that how we were going to roll out our vaccine, and we're going to get to that in a minute, but that when we got through all of the 1A staff and all of the 1A physicians and medical staff, that we would have essentially vaccinated the entire medical staff and the entire employed staff of our institution. This is receiving scrutiny in other parts of the country. And again, I think it's a real disappointment. I don't think we are jumping the line here. In fact, if you look at our occupational health data and who has come down with COVID over the last 10 months, it's really pretty evenly spread across all of our job categories and classes. In fact, one standout in the highest risk group in our organization is our EVS workers, our environmental services workers. Can I have the next slide, please? So the guiding principles for our vaccine rollout, and I'm going to turn it over to Lori to go through some of the specific detail of how we've done this, is we really are trying to do this in the most equitable and efficient manner as possible. And sometimes being equitable and efficient are in contradistinction to one another, and we need to balance those two. I think we've been incredibly efficient and we've been fairly equitable. We want to ensure that everyone in the state has access to the vaccine when it is available to them per the 1A, B, and C guidelines, and we are almost through our 1A. We've made all of our 1A invitations, and we will be moving up to the 1B later this week. That is those over 75. We're trying to promote the safety and efficacy of the vaccine because even in our organization, we've seen only about a 60% acceptance rate. People keep asking us, what is our rate of decline? And we are not expiring yet anyone's invitation. So there are some individuals who have declined, but most people have what I would say deferred. And what we're seeing is as time goes by and the reluctant staff are seeing more and more individuals who are getting vaccinated, we are seeing an uptick in those categories, those job categories. And we'll go over what the breakdown in those rates are. And finally, we want to make sure that we are incredibly collaborative with the Department of Public Health, the Connecticut Hospital Association, our other hospitals. We've been regularly sharing information. Our IT department, for example, helped Hartford Healthcare set up their instance of Epic to do the vaccine rollout similarly to the way we are doing it. We're teaching each other how to share data through CTWiz, that is the vaccine statewide database, and try to create interfaces between the VAMS system, that is the system that Deloitte set up for the CDC, our EPIC instance, Hartford's EPIC instance, and CTWiz, so that we can get good data to the state, and then we can report that data to the feds. So let me stop there and turn it over to Lori, and she can go through some of the specifics about how we have approached this and how we have begun rolling out the vaccine.
Great, thanks, Tom. So as Tom mentioned, the state of Connecticut took the federal guidelines, and each state, as you know, was able to kind of tweak it to their own guidance and their own interpretation. So this was Connecticut's. As Tom mentioned, we started with what they called phase 1A, which was defined as healthcare workers. Pretty broadly, that's basically how it was defined, with some classes of suggested workers, such as doctors, nurses, anesthesiologists, etc. So in the last 4 weeks, today or yesterday was the start of week 5. So in the first 4 weeks, that's what we focused on. And below is how we define the tracks. We really looked at having 2 simultaneous high-risk tracks. One we called the fast track and the other was not. And the reason that we did that is so that we could, to Tom's point, get all of the higher risk or people that we felt, according to our data, were higher risk through the vaccine track quicker. So those were folks that worked in the ED, the ICU, respiratory therapy, environmental services, as Tom mentioned, but all at the same time, all high risk front-facing employees were getting invitations alphabetically. I think you all were aware of that and remember that. But as of last week, all employees, including even medium risk, so that would be all of the rest of the healthcare workers in the system. Those may be behind the scenes who are supporting the frontline caregivers, and we felt that was really important to do. We followed suit with Hartford Healthcare in that. And so at this point, if you are Yale Medicine, if you are Yale New Haven Health in any way, you should have received a vaccine. This is the start of week 5, as Tom mentioned. The state alerted us on Friday that they were going to open phase 1B and said, please try to be ready for Wednesday. So to some of the complications of working with the state, my light went off here, is that the frontline workers and those who are over 75, you know, we've been planning for this all along, but certainly starting it within 2 days of being notified is a heavy lift. But we are doing our best to mine the data and really start focusing on the patients who are over 75 and what we're calling frontline essential workers, which the state has not actually yet defined. And we hope that this week we get a little more guidance there. So we are at the start of week 5, and that's kind of how we approach this. Kind of a busy slide in a timeline, but really just to give you the sense of, you know, we got our first supply of the vaccine in the middle of December. Our first day of vaccinations was December 16th. So we're not quite a month into this. And certainly we started with Pfizer, and then about a week later got Moderna. Below you can see the number of doses that we've been allocated, and we've been very vocal about that. You can see the numbers really are quite small when you consider our population and who we're trying to vaccinate. And we do have the capacity and the ability to do more, but it's a balancing act with setting up these vaccine fairs and staffing and making sure that we're using people to the best of their ability and being efficient. It's also complex to open a site. It requires DPH approval and all of the things that you would think come along with the state guidance around that regulatory. So the team, which is very large, Tom pointed out that early, has been working diligently on this. So just kind of switching gears, no good way to kind of do that, but certainly assume that you're all interested in what we have so far seen as far as adverse events or side effects. This actually is just a slide that I think Rick Martinello put together, comparing the side effects from the trials. So I think we knew about that. We heard a lot about that in the media and the literature, that for the most part, these vaccines are very safe, have very few side effects, and pretty uncommon. You can see they're common or uncommon as kind of the definitor of whether people in the trial experienced any of this. So we wanted to give you a feel of what we have experienced. So Dr. Craig Thorne put this together for us, and it's actually through yesterday's data as far as he knows. And what I mean by as far as he knows, those that have been reported through OCHealth. If someone went home and had an adverse event, managed it on their own and didn't report it, obviously we wouldn't know that. However, there is also an online app that the state of Connecticut has for folks to report side effects and adverse events statewide to try to get a feel of that. And we so far have not seen any data from that, but certainly it's on our list of things to kind of acquire. But in essence, you can see we had somewhere around 15 allergic reactions, and that's at about 20,000 doses right now, round figures. We also had some vasovagal reactions during the fairs that you can see there. For the most part, everyone did well. We do require people to wait 15 minutes. That is actually the federal CDC guidance on that. And we're hoping that over time that somewhat gets lifted. But in the studies, they did see kind of immediate reactions up to the 15-minute mark. So that's why we're asking for that. And then you can see we've had this little bit of phenomenon with Moderna vaccine where we've had some delayed skin reactions that actually happened 3 or more days after being vaccinated. But I think it's important to note that, you know, the rate in the trials of allergic type reactions is, you know, was somewhere around 0.001%, pretty small. And, you know, if we just look at our rate today, we're at 0.08. Certainly different, but probably not significant when we consider the masses that we're vaccinating. So we can get back to this if people have questions on this. So as Tom mentioned, there's a couple of things that we continue to try to impart on our staff, which is that the vaccine is safe and effective, and that we have to trust the science and really use these vaccines as one of our tools to get out of the pandemic, so that people understand that, you know, between masking and social distancing and washing our hands, that the vaccine is kind of our fourth tool, and we all need to use that. And certainly we would all love the general population to get to 80% or greater of having taken up the vaccine, so we can start to talk about more mass immunity across the country and the world. You know, initially the vaccine has not rolled out as expected as far as number of doses, and that is why the priority has been so important. Tom mentioned kind of some of the ethical controversy on that, but we really feel that we've done a really good job with that. Even to the point at the end of the fair early on, if we had extra doses, many of you know this drug is very unstable and it's only good for a few hours. So once the vial is open, we either use it or we have to discard it. But we discarded very little because we, you know, made a point to vaccinate the people who were vaccinating in the fair. We called it vaccinate the vaccinators, or the people who were helping in the fair, our caregivers, or we would call the emergency department or the ICUs or anyone who may have missed their appointment during the day and ask them to come down at that time. So we really did stick to the phases even with that. And a lot of the articles you see, even that one in the New York Times, and I think I saw one too in the Washington Post, it was around when the community pharmacies get the vaccine and have leftover doses at the end of the day, what are they going to do with it and how will they prioritize that? Hopefully at that point, we're at the general public, so all people created equal, anyone can get it, but we've been real good about trying to follow the phases. This is just some of the numbers to give you a feel. So top box kind of tells you through yesterday that we've actually been allocated over 28,000 doses. And as of yesterday, we've used 85% of that. I can tell you that by the end of every weekly allocation, we have none left. None left in the freezer and none left in storage. So we're doing a real good job about throughput. You know, we have sent over 34,000 invitations out. That number is large because it's all of our employee base as well as our medical staff and applicable, let's just say vendors. For instance, we have an outside vendor that provides the care for dialysis patients and things like that. So we feel we're doing good. We feel 85% is really good compared to the national average that you'll see there. Of the 25 million doses that are out now in circulation, the numbers are close to about only 9 million of it being administered. The bottom is really just a quick graphic. It's apologize for the confusion. The scale is kind of wonky, but I think what I would focus on are the percentages. So we're trying to show what is the percentage of folks who have gotten the vaccine within what we're calling a job family. Since this vaccine is not mandatory, we don't run lists by names of folks, but we try to group them by what we call a job family. So you can see that the highest percent in the first bar is 91%. That's the resident staff, the medical resident staff, who have been the biggest adopters of the vaccine. You know, some of the others are easy to see. You see the nurses, and then you see doctors are hovering in the 60% range, a whole group of technicians, which could be anybody from a radiology tech to a lab tech to a pharmacy tech, somewhere in the high 50s. Surprisingly, respiratory therapy is also only in the mid 50s. And then environmental services is the end there, only at a 30% uptake. I think, you know, if anything, these numbers are an underestimate. We have heard, especially in categories such as the doctors, that they have been able to get their vaccine elsewhere if they're on the medical staff of other institutions or healthcare centers. So until Epic has all that information as bidirectional, we're not able to pull it. So really, this is just directional to help our management staff really start to go out what we call one-on-one and really try to convince the employees that this is the right thing to do for themselves, for our patients, and certainly for their families. So this is kind of an eye chart, but I think what it's important to know is this has taken an army or a village, whatever term you like to use. There is a lot of people who have been working on this really almost every single day, morning till night, on everything from staffing to setup to logistics, to the clinical guidance around this, to marketing, to our modeling, which has been incredibly important to know how many doses we'll use and what we'll need and how does that equate into appointments. And then now we're starting to work with all of the external organizations on how will we vaccinate those most at need outside of the hospital settings. So Tom, do you want to do this or?
Yeah, sure, happy to. So, you know, some of our learnings to date, and a lot of this has been informed by all of you as you've experienced some of the challenges of this and fed us back important information. Our key takeaways include the following. One is staffing. To vaccinate 20,000 people in 4 days is almost like standing up a standalone business from scratch. We don't have a staff pool that we can pull from. And so by and large, we have pulled from occupational health, from our nursing staff, and then a whole slew of volunteers. Over the Christmas and New Year's holiday, more than 80 residents volunteered. I think in the end, about 60 or so actually ended up doing a 4-hour shift, at least one 4-hour shift. But a large number of folks have volunteered. The challenge is that as we continue this and we roll this out to the 3.5 million people in the state of Connecticut, we can't rely on a volunteer army. We think we can staff this with nursing staff and pharmacy staff who are going to operate the vaccine clinics, and then perhaps the individuals that are actually doing the injections might be pulled from a pool of volunteers. Number two is we don't have a business plan for this. Of course, this requires a large amount of labor, a large amount of infrastructure. We are able to obtain the vaccine for free, but still there's an enormous cost to all of this, and there is no way for us to recoup our costs. We have been told, and we are going to pursue this, that we can charge an injection fee, which I think Medicare, keep me honest here, Lori, I think reimburses, about $50 for injection in a non-hospital setting. So we're going to try to put together a business plan to be able to justify hiring the large number of people we need to do this. I think most of you've seen the national debate where the governors of all the states have said it's fantastic that we're receiving the vaccine, but the process of vaccinating is not free, and the states are all very challenged financially right now. So we're not going to see any resources from the state of Connecticut to help do this. It's unclear exactly how we are going to develop regional partnerships. There's an individual who is a graduate he's an ex-McKinsey partner or management consultant from McKinsey, who the State Department of Public Health has tapped to lead the Department of Public Health's effort. We've worked closely with him, with the state commissioner, acting commissioner, and the governor's office to begin the discussion about what role the health systems and the hospitals in the state of Connecticut should play in mass vaccination. We can talk more about that at the end if there is time, but right now we're not getting clear signals from the DPH about what role they want us to play. The support center that's in the back office, and including our COVID call center, in order to field vaccine questions, in order to help people through symptoms. And also we're using technology, and of course, not everyone is equally technologically savvy. So many people have had trouble navigating MyChart, the MyChart app. In fact, many people aren't registered on our system, don't have MyChart, but it's important that we have a mechanism to be able to schedule and track. So we've decided that was going to be our mechanism. Lori mentioned this bi-directional interface. The community is using VAMS, the Vaccine Administration Management System that Deloitte, I mentioned at the beginning of the hour, that Deloitte created for the CDC. It's a little clunky. It doesn't allow you to integrate the vaccine information once you've been vaccinated into your electronic medical record or other medical record. So both Hartford Healthcare and ourselves have decided to do this directly in Epic. And as we've talked about, we're trying to create a bidirectional interface so that we can populate CT-WIZ and ultimately VAMS. That's very slow going. And as you can imagine, as they're rolling this out across the country, working with Yale New Haven Health System is not really one of their priorities. And then finally, we've got a large number of dashboards. Our joint data analytics team, that's JDAT, is plugged into our Epic feed, and we're able to produce this data real time that Lori just showed, and we're able to track where we're having struggles, where we're succeeding. And in general, with all of the challenges that we have, I think the 2 or 3 things that have emerged. Number one is we're not getting enough vaccine. As you saw, we range from a low of 1,900 doses in the first week. Second week, we received about 9,000 doses. But since then, in the other 2 weeks, we've only received around 7. We could probably vaccinate about 2,000 per day if we were fully up in our current vaccinating sites. So in 7 days, we should be able to do 14,000 vaccinations. So I think, Lori, we're going to get 14,000 next week, but fingers are crossed, right?
Yep. We don't know for sure yet.
So in next steps, besides the vaccine, the other problem is how are we going to scale this in our communities? How are we going to work with the health departments, the FQHCs, the DPH, all that work is ongoing. The allocations and transparency of how the vaccine is allocated to the different delivery networks, I think has gone exceedingly well in the state of Connecticut. Our challenge is the state as a whole has not been receiving enough vaccine. Our data and Hartford Healthcare's data as the two largest systems in the state is quite similar. They are about the same percentages of their total staff as we are, and they, like us, are using 100% of their allocation every week. That's something we agreed upon early on in this, is that we were not going to hold any doses back. And I think Biden's discussions around sending out the full allocation from the feds is the right move as well. We're hoping that there's going to be changing in guidance around the 15-minute waiting time that Lori mentioned. That 15 minutes adds one more logistical challenge. We don't have a lot of empty space where we can both have a vaccine clinic and have people who are trying to socially distance congregate for that 15 minutes while they're waiting. If we could eliminate the majority of that 15 minutes, we might be able to do a better job at a high throughput site. I mentioned the FDA's advisory note back on the 4th. We'll continue to monitor to see if there's going to be any change there. There's been a big push, particularly with the new strain, the highly infective strain, to get everyone a first dose. I think from up till now, the ACIP and the FDA have resisted those calls, but we'll see what happens as that strain gains a foothold here in the United States. And finally, as I mentioned challenges earlier, in addition to the vaccine allocation, two other challenges I think really have emerged. One was the staffing that I mentioned and trying to stand up this very large business really out of nothing. But the final challenge is vaccine acceptance. I really think we have not gotten our public completely assured that this is safe and effective, and we need to do a better job collectively of getting that information out there so that we can really get to the 80% that we need as a population. And I think that, Lori, is our last slide.
Yep, I'll just stop sharing.
So I know that's a lot of information, but we wanted to leave plenty of time for questions or discussion because this has been really, this has been an enormous amount of work over 4 weeks. And I think that our goal, as we've stated at the beginning, was to get 80% of our healthcare workers vaccinated within the first 7 to 8 weeks. So at almost 60%, I think we're pretty close and at 4 weeks, we're pretty close to a goal, to that goal. But what we're going to experience over the next 2 weeks is going to be most important with regard to vaccine hesitancy.
Thank you very much for that absolutely terrific talk and for taking the time to speak to our section. If folks have questions, they can either raise their hand and we can unmute, or people can put questions into the chat function.
So Dan, I'll go first. First of all, thank you and Tom for presenting to us, taking the time this morning among what is, I know, a very hectic period to spend this time and educate us about where we stand. My question relates to the coordination between our Yale New Haven Health and Yale Medicine strategy and our Yale University strategy. And I know, you may not represent that component, but I wanted to, because many of our faculty and staff on this call sit either in the divide or on one side or the other. I wanted to kind of hear from you all how you're working together and what people can expect related to where they sit on that divide.
You want to go first, Lori?
Yeah, sure. So it's a great question. Thanks, Dr. Velasquez. We have been working both with Yale Medicine, the Yale Health Plan, and then in general, the university's been involved. They too had to follow the guidance of 1A, B, C, just as we discussed. And the Yale Health Plan has done that with who they consider their frontline kind of healthcare workers who we would not have covered. However, most of the Yale Medicine folks have come to our fairs, and we kind of said, just go wherever you can go, either Yale Health or Yale New Haven Health. I'm sorry, Yale Health or Yale New Haven Health, locations. They're going to be part of our regional kind of collaborative for the city of New Haven going forward, also including the New Haven Health Department, the FQHCs. And I would also mention that Yale Health did get a supply for one of the weeks, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, to start their immunization. And then after that, the state wasn't able to give Yale Health any allocation at all. So we've actually been providing the doses to Yale Health, actually both, I think at this point, we might have provided somewhere around 1,000 doses just to keep them moving, because it's in our best interest to have a lot of sites open. So what's really not transparent from the state is, how do they decide who gets what? And so it is frustrating for the users like Yale Health to be told they didn't get any, as well as over the weekend, the FQHC, Cornell Scott was told they're not getting any. So we again had to share some of our supply with them. We think that's the right thing to do, and we think that's in our best interest because they will help us vaccinate more folks. But they are very involved, and we're kind of including them in our collaboratives. Dr. Britta Roy is part of our task force as well. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think I guess maybe just for clarification, Yale Health, I guess, is going to take responsibility for developing a strategy for Yale University vaccination.
Correct.
So for those faculty who are more science focused or do not have a Yale Medicine or Yale New Haven Health affiliation, that's where, just as a warning, that's where they're going to have to wait to hear the plan from.
That's correct. Yep.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I spent yesterday, and I'm sure everyone else has too, my entire clinic day trying to answer the question, I have Afib. Is that a high risk condition? When am I going to get my vaccine? Do you, it may be that you're not up to this part yet, but do you anticipate that kind of personalized, individualized prioritization based on medical history is going to be part of this, or the rollout is really just going to be broader than that? And whether you have what your heart condition is probably isn't going to really play a role.
I think that what we're doing right now, I think that was Rachel, right?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So I think what we're doing right now is between Hartford Healthcare and ourselves, we have 3.5 million unique individuals in our instance of Epic, and Hartford Healthcare has about the same. So Lisa Stump has been working with John Brady at the Connecticut Hospital Association, who has access to census data, and with her counterpart at Hartford Healthcare. And we just started this effort yesterday. The first cut is everybody over age 75, which is relatively simple. I mean, we've got zip code information and we've got age. So we should be able to take that first cut of everybody over 75. Your point about I have Afib is a good one, because the next cut is 65 and comorbidities. That's going to be a little hard because no one has really defined, Lori mentioned this earlier, no one's really defined a complete list of what is an essential worker. Similarly, no one has created a complete list of what are high-risk conditions. I think we all would agree on most of them, but unbelievably to me, this is starting to gain traction and become actually litigious. And you saw the New York Times article. I mentioned to this group that I got an inquiry from an attorney last night. People are turning this into something and turning folks against one another, rather than approaching this, with a charitable assumption that we're all trying to do the best thing and get the maximum number of people vaccinated as fast as we can. I sure do hope that's where it goes. And what we are going to do is try to send invites to all of our patients first, meaning anybody who has an Epic record. And we're going to try to do that in a coordinated fashion with the other hospitals in the state of Connecticut. Now, I really don't understand how we are going to decide what are the right conditions or not when we go down the list beyond 75. But I'm sure that the DPH and the CDC and others will help us figure that out. Otherwise, we're all going to be making it up on our own, and that's going to be really messy.
Yeah, they haven't defined those kind of what they're calling the comorbid conditions, yet. And if every state does it different, to Tom's point, that's going to be a little messy. There's a couple of questions in the chat that I can address. So there's a question about, which is a great question about inpatients. So if someone's gotten their first dose and due for their second dose and they're an inpatient, or really now as we open up to over 75 and they're inpatient. So there is actually a group who was convened late last week to start working on the logistics around that. Again, the logistics of opening one vial means that we must vaccinate 10 people if we're considering Moderna. And so we're just trying to do everything right so that we don't waste any doses, but we will be vaccinating in patients where it's appropriate. Great question.
Mayron asked if there's a plan in place to track potential long-term effects. So we're asking people who are getting vaccine to sign up for VSafe. VSafe is the vaccine tracker information that the CDC has, and we're getting a pretty good uptake in that. We recently added the VSafe QR code onto the tip sheet that we're handing to everyone post-vaccine, and we're seeing about a 50% uptick in people signing up for VSafe. So, you know, we will participate with that, and I think the CDC will be able to give us information about long-term effects. I do hope that, you know, people focus on the one long-term effect that it has, in that it prevents COVID-19.
Can I ask a question? I've had several patients tell me either they're going to Florida because it's the winter and that's what a lot of people do, or they're going down there. And while down there, several of them have gotten the vaccine or planning to. And I've advised them that they need to stay in Florida then to get the second dose, because when they come back up here, we might not be doing the same type of person because it's state by state. Is that correct advice?
Yeah, I guess on the surface, I would say yes, it is, because the way that we get the second dose is based on how much first dose they sent us. It's not a great science. I think as more vaccine is released into circulation, it will become less of an issue. And certainly that's the goal of both Pfizer and Moderna. And then hopefully the next two kind of in the queue are AstraZeneca and J&J. But it's not bad advice to give your patient that, because the institution or the location that gave that first dose is where the government will send the second dose. So it's not a great answer, but unfortunately that's how it's been set up logistically.
Another question here. Erica Spatz asks about the engagement of communities of color. That's a great question. You know, we have, and we asked Tisha Johnson, and I think Brita Roy's been part of this, as has Marcella, that we need to approach, particularly, I mean, you have two questions in here, I think, Erica, is that there's been a number of folks who are leaders, and we've also have a lot of problems within this community around vaccine acceptance. And there are lots of stories to tell. So we're tapping through Tisha, we're tapping we're asking the culture ambassadors to help sort of defuse some of the anti-vaccine sentiment that's been going on in the city of New Haven. Some of you may have heard about that. And we have been, why is there not more marketing? That's a good question. You know, I'd defer that to Vin Petrini and Rob Hutchison. You know, they've basically created a marketing campaign with the posters you see in the social media and the selfie wall and the posting of those things. I don't have any, I'm not a marketing expert, so I don't really have any hopeful, useful information on that, but I can pass that along to Vin and to Rob. As of today, state's going to allow 1B to be eligible for excess doses. Yeah, we're going to go beyond that. We think that just because of the timing, and Lori can probably do a better job of explaining this, because we got the Pfizer vaccine first, and the second dose of Pfizer is 21 days, and then we began getting almost exclusively Moderna, and the second dose there is 28 days. There's going to be a gap in having really no second doses for about 10 days, starting the end of this week and into next. So we should have, if we get the full 14,000 doses we're expecting, we should be able to move heavily into the 1B 75 years of age and older by the end of this week, beginning of next. The logistics of that we don't have completely worked out, but we think we're going to have some sort of a different technological solution, as those folks aren't as connected via email and such as our employees and medical staff. So we're working through that right now.
Yeah, and someone asked the distinction about would they have to enter an order for the vaccine, or will we send the invite? I mean, we're working on all of that. We're trying to make it as easy as possible. To me, you know, if we can avoid having to enter an order for every patient and we can just identify them and send them that invite, that would be the way to go.
Arthur, you mentioned the State Connecticut website suggests the public may not be eligible until the fall or summer. You know, I think that's speculation. We've gotten through 1A faster than the state thought we were. Correct. So I'm really hoping that that can continue. That, you know, and I have to say the state, the governor's office, the DPH have done a really nice job of getting the doses out as fast as they can. And I think it's been a great partnership with them. Let's hope that that continues. You know, I think there was a lot of anxiety about a couple things. One is how would we prioritize, and two, whether or not there would be access to the second dose. And we did struggle a little bit with using all of our doses up front because we are going on faith that they'll be delivering those second doses. So far, so good. I hope that that continues. But again, our policy is deliver everything that we get, not hold anything back.
Looks like Sarah Hull has her hand raised. We can unmute.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you both for that excellent presentation and also just for all of the incredible work you're doing in this really important public health effort. And I would also just urge everyone, or anyone who's interested, I volunteered for some of the vaccine clinics, and it's kind of fun. It brought me back to residency days, and it's also really just kind of exciting to be part of this public health effort. I wanted to ask a question about, or sort of, I guess maybe a comment on questions about how we're identifying people after sort of the easy criterion of age greater than 75 and whether we're going to have to put in orders. I would just advocate for, just like Lori said, I think a system where we don't have to put in orders is going to be optimal. First of all, because if it is dependent upon the physician to put in an order, that's going to create a lot of confusion. Who's going to be the one to put in the order? How do we decide who's going to get it? And that really sets up an opportunity for further inequity, and I realize the priority of the efficiency versus equity needs to be balanced, but I think that's going to create problems with efficiency and equity. And I know that just in my own experience, in terms of patients who are asking me, oh, like Rachel said, I have Afib, I have, you know, this some cardiac abnormality, I'm going to be higher risk. Can I get prioritized for the vaccine? That's been almost exclusively white patients. And I'm just concerned that this is going to be, if it's something that's done on an individual physician level, I think there's a large potential to just further inequities. Whereas if there's a clear system-wide criterion for what are the things that are going to trigger patients to be invited, and then they're invited by some central scheduling algorithm rather than on an individual patient physician level, I just think that's going to really help with both perception and actuality of an effort to sort of ensure equity and efficiency across the system.
I appreciate the comments. I think you're exactly right. Yep. Right now, I think Craig Thorne is winning the race in terms of most orders in Epic. He's put in 33,000 orders for vaccine. I think we need to have a system like you describe, and I think that's probably where we'll end up.
Thank you. That's why we've been starting to mine the data. And, you know, Tom, it is easy, obviously, to pull by age, but we have been trying to pull it initially by not just age, but also what other comorbidities they may have in their data. So we'll be ready once they start defining that.
And again, I think, you know, we could argue about whether heart failure or advanced cancer should go first or one ahead of the other. I think that's a losing argument. I think we need to get everybody in as fast as we can get in.
Right.
And that needs to be our focus.
Agree.
I have a question.
We're also interested in challenges, any problems you've seen, because, you know, we put this together in 4 weeks. We are not getting everything right. So we're very interested in what you're seeing and what you're hearing of challenges, perhaps.
It looks like Joyce has her hand raised after whoever that is.
Yeah, Franz Walker. I'm having my first dose Wednesday, How do we sign up to be a volunteer to give the vaccinations? Where do we go?
Yeah, Jim Revkin asked the same thing. We don't have a technological way to do that right now. In fact, again, this is an all volunteer army. There's a single person, Judy Peterson Pickett, who's creating the schedules. Right now, we're staffed fairly well. I think what we're all worried about is as we scale, we don't have a way of growing that staff. So what we're looking into is either using QGenda or one of the other software programs to try to put an online schedule that would be open to everyone so that you could go ahead and go into the website, go into the schedule and schedule yourself into a vaccinator slot. This is something that, I'm going to go out on a limb. Lori may take issue with what I'm about to say, but we've pushed each other very hard on this internally. And there's been a lot of internal discussion. In my opinion, we need to have a hospital-based pharmacist to oversee each one of our vaccinating sites, and then a resource nurse to really run the show and make sure that the safety systems are in place to watch patients. But the 3 or 4 or more vaccinators that are there, and perhaps even the diluter, the person who is drawing up the syringes, those can be volunteers with a minimum of training. But what we don't want is to have someone come for 1 4-hour shift, because there is some training that needs to happen. So we're trying to get, if we're going to do a volunteer to do the vaccinations, we're going to try to get people to commit to, a series of shifts, for example. But we're still working through those details. And I think we can get to a mass vaccination number, because there has been a huge outpouring of interest. And I think, as I forget who just spoke, it is extremely fun to do the vaccines, and the range of emotions that you get from people who come in, and their stories are really incredible. People just breaking down, talking about their own experiences and their families' experiences through this. But it is great.
Could I just add one quick thing? And that is, it kind of goes back to Dr. Velasquez's question about working with YM. We are trying to identify large venues as well to work collaboratively together to have high throughput sites once, especially we get to general public, because we would never be able to, nor would we want to, send the masses through our hospital or ambulatory sites. So when you think of volunteering, there will be a giant need once we get to that phase. So stay tuned. I would just add that. And so we're looking at, auditoriums and the Bridgeport Arena and things like that. So just to give you a feel.
Yeah, thank you.
Joyce has her hand raised. Joyce, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yep, thanks, Dan. So I have a lot of questions from patients asking me to write letters so that they can get the vaccine sooner. And I keep telling them that that's not going to be any way that that they're going to be able to jump the line, in a sense. And so do you think after the 1C, after the 75 years old, do you think that will ever be a thing where we actually have to write a letter saying this patient has all these comorbidities? No. Or is it really going to be like the EPIC and looking at the diagnoses?
I think the issues of equity that were brought up earlier, I think that, your persons of privilege are going to be more willing and able to advocate like that. And I think that would not fly. I don't think we're going to, that's not a place we would go.
Yeah, that's what I've been telling them. So that's good. Thank you.
Do you disagree, Lori?
No, I totally agree. I think it'll get to then general public kind of within that gray zone, right? So quickly that we'll be relying on, much like we do the flu vaccine, we'll be relying on community pharmacies and these big bang operations to get as many people vaccinated as possible.
John Forrest asks when this is going to happen for the age 75. I'm thinking that probably it's going to start with a little trickle later this week. And I think by the middle of next week, we'll have figured out how we're going to do it. And so I would say large scale, Lori, age 75 and older, I would say 3 weeks from right now would be large scale, but we're going to start testing it probably the end of this week.
Yeah, we have many logistical hurdles, especially if you think about just sending vaccine to all of our ambulatory locations. That's going to be a challenge.
Jeff Bender had a question in the chat about the issue about efficacy of the S protein encoding RNA vaccines against the S gene dropout variant.
So are you asking, Jeff, particularly the B1.1.7? This is that's the UK predominant.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, that's in New Haven now, as you know, Tom.
Yeah.
Very well.
No, we had 2 cases reported about 5 days ago. You know, you guys are probably all better read than I am, but what my understanding is, you know, the efficacy is still there. But you know, the first slide we had with the vaccine tracker and the myriad of the 100 different kinds of vaccines that are out there, you know, if it turns out that this or another variant eludes that antibody, then 2 things. One is that we've got hopefully other vaccines in the pipeline that will address that because they'll be, you know, present antigens to other parts of the virus. But, you know, I think what they've demonstrated now is the technology of this mRNA. You know, remember this virus was reported on December 12th of 2019. It was 30 days later on January 12th of 2020 when the complete mRNA sequence was published. So within 30 days, they turned it around. And I think now that we have experience, if there is a substantial variant, they should be able to, again, create a new mRNA vaccine. The question is what is the FDA is going to set for a bar if that happens for a new trial, or would they just release it because the basis is the same? The other thing that I've worried about, and I'm interested in people's thoughts, is we are now mixing vaccinated folks against the spike protein to non-vaccinated folks. And we're encouraging everyone to mask and physical distance and, you know, can still have hand hygiene. The problem is we are just now placing an enormous amount of pressure, selection pressure, on perhaps a new strain. And if there is a wild type that develops a mutation that evades this immune response, that could spell trouble for us as we mix vaccinated with unvaccinated people.
Thanks, Tom.
Any other questions?
Well, excellent. Yeah, if there's no further questions, I don't see any in the chat function. I don't see any hands raised, and it is about 9 o'clock. I just want to thank you both for spending the morning with us and speaking to the cardiology section about Yale New Haven Health's experience and plans with vaccination. It's been a Herculean effort. It's gone, from our perspective, it seems like it's gone incredibly smoothly. And we thank you very much and look forward to more updates and more progress. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments and ideas. We appreciate them very much. Thank you so much.
Have a good day.